And good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the African American Athlete. I'm Rickey Hampton, along with my co-host Michael Roberson, coming to you on a Friday evening. And Mike, we got two great guests, esteemed guests here tonight, as we celebrate and put into perspective the life of the great Jim Brown, who passed away last night at the age of 87. We have Dr. William K. Head, great football coach, athletic administrator for many years at HBCUs all across the country. We got an NBA legend here, the great Ray Scott, as I always call him, a walking double-double, and the first black man to be named the Coach of the Year in the National Basketball Association, and an esteemed author of one of my favorite books, The NBA in Black and White, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA coach.
Hey, I want you to know I have that same book almost within reach.
Yeah, and Charlie Rosen. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining Mike and I. We just thought it was important that we spent some time talking about Mr. Brown tonight. And I just want to start the show off with this.
Who have left their mark on society like Jim Brown. An all-encompassing star, Jim burst onto the scene as a multi-sport standout at Syracuse in the 1950s, excelling in basketball and track while becoming an All-American in both football and lacrosse. Jim was inducted into the National Lacrosse Hall of Fame in 1983, the first African-American to receive such an honor. But he became a legend on the gridiron. Brown was drafted 6th overall by the Cleveland Browns in 1957 and immediately was a star. Rushing for an NFL record 237 yards in just the 9th game of his rookie season, he went on to be named the league's most valuable player. The next year, Jim broke the single-season rushing record by nearly 400 yards with a remarkable 1,527 yards in rushing in only a 12-game season, winning another MVP. He would go on to play some 9 seasons, continuing to stamp his name across the NFL record book. Jim retired after the 1965 season when he won his 3rd and final most valuable player award, holding both the single-season rushing record, 1,860 yards in 1963, and the career mark with more than 12,000 yards, the first running back ever to eclipse the 10,000-yard mark. Jim was named to the Pro Bowl in each of his 9 seasons while leading the league in rushing a record 8 times, and he remains the only player in league history to average more than 100 yards rushing per game. He was enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1971. But Jim was much more than a football player. He was an accomplished actor with credits in dozens of films, including box office hits like The Dirty Dozen and Ice Station Zebra. But his lasting impact just may have been through his civic work. Brown was a major figure in the civil rights movement, and his support of Muhammad Ali, who refused his draft induction during the war in Vietnam, led to an iconic summit in 1967 alongside Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and other top African-American athletes. There, Brown forged a very special bond with Ali. Brown would continue his work, founding the American program in 1988 to help gang members and prison inmates to learn life management skills and personal growth techniques. A civil rights champion, a world-class athlete, Jim Brown will always be remembered for the mark he left on the sports world and society as a whole.
And this moment from the guy I think is the template for the 21st century athlete, the respect Jim has garnered throughout his lifetime.
Last several months, 26-2 in their last 28 home games, including 6-1 in the playoffs. The only home loss, as you see LeBron James bowing to James Brown, the legendary Cleveland Brown, as he gets set for the tip-off.
We're not talking the singer, Mike. We're talking Jim Brown, the football player.
I should call him Mr.
Yeah, we all should. That's the greatness in the building here tonight.
And this was right before the game. Mr. Jim Brown.
And you can take that for granted. That is 2 of the best athletes that we've ever seen, all time.
I just loved, I thought, just the respect this man has earned from generations till, today's iconic athlete, LeBron James. Ray, I want to open up with your thoughts of Jim. You were playing in the professional in the NBA during the same time he was doing this thing in the NFL. Your thoughts on Jim?
Well, for me, Jim Brown was a childhood Marvel comic hero because when he was in 57, as I was going into my freshman year of college, Jim Brown was a statement of professional football because I had been a Joe Perry, Hugh McElhenney, Steve Van Buren kind of fan. But Jim Brown became that indestructible human being that I saw play pro football for 9 years, never sustaining a serious injury, always at the top of the list when you talked about running backs. And I saw a statistic that said he was 8 of 9 years, he was all pro. I'm wondering what happened in that 1 year. I'm still trying to figure out what, because and his consistency was immeasurable. So, Jim Brown was more of the names that you say in your house that are indelibly implanted into your culture. He was a cultural transfixion, in my opinion. And, I didn't see him as a civil rights activist. I saw him as a human rights activist because he stood up for economics. He stood up for people. He tried his best to stand for what was right. Now, a football player, I'm a Cookie Gilchrist fan. I love Cookie Gilchrist. Cookie Gilchrist, one of the great running backs of all time. I love Gale Sayers. I love these guys. But just demonstrably that guy, that tough man, that strong man, that John Henry that went out there every Sunday, and they had just begun to put football on television in 57 because of the 56 run by the New York Giants. If it's done in New York, it'll go all over the world.
Right.
So we saw it in New York, and New York and Baltimore, the Colts, it was classic. But Jim Brown took football by the shoulder pads and lifted it into our living rooms for 9 years. And it took a doggone movie to take him away from us. Although he made 50 movies. Think about that. 50 movies in his career. He was that guy. He was that person that we truly, as a nation and as a culture, will miss him.
Dr. Head, your thoughts on what Jim meant to you?
Yeah, like Ray, Jim was the tough guy's tough guy.
Yeah.
No matter what he did, it was tough. Standing beside Muhammad Ali, he looked tough. In every situation you noted him in, he always seemed to be in complete command of what was going on. Even if you didn't know what was going on, he seemed to be the drum major in the parade. I think he was the beginning of a little boy in 1957, 58, whenever he came into the league. He was the beginning of my interest in football. In Nashville, we used to get the games from of all people, the Washington Redskins on Sunday. And they had a gentleman by the name of Johnny Olszewski. Now, I was into the football game if I remember Johnny Olszewski's name. But then all of a sudden, they played the Cleveland Browns one Sunday, and I said, who is that? And the man kept calling his name, Jim Brown, Jim Brown. And the man that was blocking for him, Bobby Mitchell, was better than any back in the league other than him.
Yeah.
And over the years, watching him grow from being a football icon to becoming a TV actor to becoming the face of, as Ray so astutely said, the human rights activist, the supporter of Martin Luther King, supporter of Ali, supporter of all those folks in the forefront of human rights and social justice. He was one of the faces, just like you look at that picture with he and Ali and Alcindor. Well, he was Alcindor at the somewhere then, and then you had Curtis McClinton, who was a running back with the Chiefs, who was in the background. Bobby Mitchell, Ernie Davis, not Ernie Davis, Willie Davis with the Green Bay Packers, all in that picture. And you saw a cross section of the greatest show on earth, black folks in professional athletics. The crowning jewel for Jim when he broke out in the movies was kissing, and I just thought of her name.
Raquel Welch.
He kissed Michelle and looked like there was thunder and lightning going off, because you know that the white community was going, oh my gosh, this black man is kissing this white woman like he really means it. And later on, I read an article that Miss Welch wrote or was quoted in as saying Jim hadn't been instructed in movie kisses. So Jim sucked her up like he sucked up all the women. And she said she was totally taken aback, didn't know what to do. Jim just muscled her. So yeah, the continual rise of this man, when you look at the fact that he came into the NFL and just kept right on going. He left the NFL, he kept right on going. He did movies and he kept right on going. So the ebb of his flow has now come. And the thing that I will say, I am thankful to have lived the time that I have lived, because I have seen so many things change. But I'm somewhat discouraged sometimes, because the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same.
Yeah. And Mike, I'm interested to get your perspective, because you are the baby of this group. So yeah, you heard the legacy and the lore. You have spent time in Ohio. You know how important he is to the Cleveland era. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so like I was born a year after he retired. So when I was really cognizant of what I was watching football, of course, the big stars were OJ and those guys in the early 70s. And then, of course, my introduction to Jim Brown was in the movies, in the blaxploitation movies. So, and Fred Williamson, can't forget the Hammer. So all those guys, I said, man, these guys were the men back in the 60s. I was like, man, I'm kind of disappointed I didn't get to see them. But, then we kind of went further when OJ and Franco and all them were becoming the stars. And then all of a sudden Jim would come back around and say, Franco runs out of bounds too much. And OJ is a sellout. And it's like, so he was like, he came back and it seemed like he was this bitter man. But all the accolades that he had from back in the day, and of course in the movies, I was like, this guy's the man. And all the older people I talked to said, Jim Brown's the man. Jim Brown's the man. When you talk about quintessential running back, he was the man. When it comes to being a strong black male in Hollywood, he's the man. So I was like, man, so and I was really wanting to actually meet him. I said, man, I would love to meet Jim Brown one day. Never came to fruition, but yeah, so that was my perspective. I got introduced to him, for me visually seeing in the movies, but because I was such a sports fan, even back then as a kid, I had a great appreciation of Jim Brown. And I just, and like you said, Ricky, when you got to these latter years with the Trump stuff and all that, same thing with me. I was like, I still love this guy, but man, what's going on? And it was a few people that were there. Just like we had Mac on when he kind of crushed me about my favorite football player, Lynn Swann, kind of messing things up for at USC when he canceled a program that was for black students. So that, when you have that kind of stuff happen, you say, man, can I take away from all that I loved back when I was a kid? Or, do I say, you know what? Maybe it's a misstep, and you can't forget what all the greatness has been done.
But Mike hit on something, man. And I think about that time, Ray, and you were right in the middle of the 60s, the coolness of the black athlete, the swagger of our league. Jim had that swagger. Those Baltimore Bullet teams you played on had swagger with Earl the Pearl and Gus. The Knicks,
especially Gus and his gold teeth. Ricky, what is most significant about what you're saying is you're sitting here looking at Ray. Ray was in the first wave of the great black athlete, great black professional athletes that were recognized, just like Jim Brown. The evolution of the black professional athlete began with them, because prior to that time, the Browns had Marion Motley, and but they were spotty.
Night Train Lane, Dick Night Train Lane.
One black guy. Well, they had Roger Brown and Dick Night Train Lane. Yeah. And they were the only two black guys on Pittsburgh's and John Henry Johnson. You remember him, Ray?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
They were the only three guys that did anything significant on the Pittsburgh team. The New York Giants, who were the monsters of the Midway, had no black player. Rosie Greer. And
Rosie Taylor.
They also had Rosie Greer. Rosie Greer was defensive lineman.
Greer
to LA.
Emlyn Tunnell.
Yeah, defensive back.
And in baseball, the coolness, Willie Mays, the basket catch, Stretch McCovey,
with that big
Juan Marichal with the windup, Louis Tia, all this coolness. And it was being introduced, Ray, because finally TV was beginning to slowly make its way into the market. It was just on the weekends then. Right. We get it every night now.
Right. What transpired, in my opinion, was the transformation from the 50s to the 60s was so important, because so many things opened up so quickly and so vastly because of television. Prior to the 60s, the NBA was a spectator sport. In other words, when you spectate a sport, you read about it in the newspapers and you listen to it on the radio. That was what we had going. When the 60s came about, and after the 1960 Olympics with Oscar Robertson, Walt Bellamy, and Bob Boozer, those were the three African-American Olympians. The world began to change, in my opinion, and Dr. Head, who is a great historian, and Michael, you're a young historian, but in the 1960s, John Fitzgerald Kennedy said that we wanted to include the Negro in the experience of success and moving forward in America. And when he made that proclamation, some owners in the NBA, and there was only 8 or 9 of them, were brought kicking and screaming into that era of Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, and Bill Russell.
Yes, sir.
Tickets. And they sold those basketball tickets. And television then says, like they did with Jim Brown, what's going on here? Does this sell? And without it selling in New York, remember, basketball was a Northeastern professional game. Syracuse, Boston, New York, Philadelphia. That was your 4 teams in the East.
Syracuse Nationals.
Syracuse Nationals. That team, and then you had the out West teams, and West was St. Louis.
That was about as far as West went then.
And until the Lakers went from Minneapolis, it was St. Louis was the West. So when I looked at all of this, St. Louis, what was it? St. Louis, Detroit, Cincinnati. There was a Fort Wayne team, Chicago team. There's a team I'm missing. I always miss them.
Milwaukee,
Chicago, White Sox, and the Cubs.
Teams in the West.
St. Louis?
No, it was the Lakers.
Okay.
Minneapolis.
Lakers. That was the 5. And so when you had that change, and then you televised these guys to the world, and people in their living rooms began to see Wilt and Russell every weekend. That was what the TV channels want. NBC wanted Wilt, and they wanted Russell.
And
those guys.
You mentioned. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that was what was how basketball was sold out of the Northeast to the rest of the country.
Rick, you mentioned baseball a moment ago. Used to be that you got one baseball game a week on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Pee Wee Reese and Dizzy Dean.
Yeah.
The worst broadcasting crew ever. Dizzy Dean was from somewhere in Arkansas, and Pee Wee was from Kentucky somewhere. Now you know who they were representing. But anyway, when you look at what Ray was just talking about, all of the basketball, football, and baseball was concentrated in those same cities. Mm-hmm. There was no outlier somewhere who came into the league. You had Chicago, the White Sox, the Cubs, the Cardinals, 3 baseball teams. You had Chicago with 2 football teams. Not Chicago Cardinals. That maybe they were.
No, they were the Chicago Cardinals. They were the Chicago Cardinals at first, though.
Yeah.
And the Bears, yes.
Yeah, Chicago Cardinals and the Bears.
Yeah.
And the thing that came about, I don't know if you recognized his name, Kubiak.
Yeah.
He played shortstop for the New York Yankees in the 50s.
Kubiak.
And he was on this was into the mid 60s. And he made a statement about the difference that the black athlete had made in baseball. He said they bring something to the table that nobody else ever has. And he simply said foot speed. They're exciting on the bases. They're exciting on defense. Balls that used to fall in for base hits no longer hit the ground. So his statement in that time and day was a significant statement, because he was saying that the black athlete had changed the nature of baseball. Ray was talking about the ownership being dragged into stuff. The Washington then Redskins had a owner who pledged to never have a black player.
Yeah.
So
George Marshall.
Yes.
His famous quote was, "If y'all want a black player so bad, I'll just get a white boy and paint him black and put him on the field." That's what we're gonna get.
Hey, wonderful sentiment, right?
Yeah.
So you look at those times and you look at the people who were in ownership. You look at Washington must have had the worst ownership. The Redskins Nationals, not Nationals, but
Senators.
Yeah,
Senators.
okay. Yeah, well, no, I'm talking about the football team. They must have had the worst continuous ownership of any team in any sport.
That's correct.
I mean, you go from the man who said we'll never have a black player. You got this fella now that comes in the morning and starts harassing people and using abrasive language, and it just sounds like a soap opera. And Washington has led the all leagues in soap operas. I mean, they just it's just been a mess for them for a long time. When Joe Gibbs was there, Joe Gibbs won Super Bowls because he was the guy in charge of everything. But other than that, they've struggled, and most of it is because of leadership that was questionable at the very best, and ridiculously inept at the very worst.
And I remember in that time period of Jim Brown, Mike and Coach Head, the influx of the HBCU athlete to professional football started in the AFL, where the Kansas City Chiefs and the Raiders were bringing in guys, and they slowly made their way into the NFL. Guys like Deacon Jones, Bob Hayes for the Dallas Cowboys, and you look at the NFL in that time period. Jim Brown, the greatest player in the NFL. Wilt Chamberlain, the greatest player in the NBA. Willie Mays, the greatest player in Major League Baseball. And I could give you other names: Henry Aaron, Frank Robinson, Triple Crown winner. I mean, it was just an explosion. And to me,
but you know what created the explosion, right?
With all due respect to Bill Russell and what he did in Boston. Go ahead, Dr. Head.
You know what created that explosion, right? When Kansas City won the Super Bowl, and my man Otis Taylor caught a simple out route, made a pivot, and scored the winning touchdown. All of a sudden, he's from where? Prairie. What? Where in the heck is that? I've got a picture. I'm trying to get Robert James. You remember Robert James? He played
all-pro cornerback from Fisk.
Yeah. I'm trying to get him into the HBCU NFL Hall of Fame, nominated him. And I've got a picture with him covering Otis Taylor. And when you look at the two men and where they came from, and all the people, Kansas City had the most HBCU players, I think, on one team ever. Mm-hmm. They just had them piled up, and
Stram, yeah.
And Stram was the kind of guy that was strong enough to say, to heck with what people think. And they put HBCUs into the conversation with what's the man's name? Lloyd.
Earl Lloyd.
No,
the Super Scout.
Super Scout.
Yeah, I know.
Lloyd Wells.
Lloyd Wells. Yes.
Yeah.
So that was the breaking point, because Kansas City had won a world championship with a team full of young men from HBCUs.
Yeah.
Well, see, I hate to show my age, but because I went in football, when you get back to the 20s and 30s with Fitz Pollard and the football did integrate. Football tried to lead, and that was because of the great writer Grantland Rice. When you talk about the old LA Rams with Deacon Dan Towler, they had the running backs that went out to LA. There were cities that tried to introduce. They tried to introduce in football the African American player. When you talk about Marion Motley, there were great individual players. But when I think of those players, and from my perspective as a young kid, said being in Philadelphia was the Eagles. Well, the guy that moved that needle, and we're watching him right now, was number 32.
Yep.
He was the guy that said every Sunday, we want to see the Cleveland Browns. I don't care what our home team was doing. We wanted to see the Cleveland Browns because we wanted to see number 32 and we wanted to see Bobby Mitchell. And that started it. And then they started bringing in the wide receivers with Clifton Sticks McNeil, those guys that they were going to do great things. But as fast as they were, as good as they were, and like I said, I love Gale Sayers and I saw Joe Perry because I went to school on the West Coast. But I'll tell you, I never saw anybody on a football field like Jim Brown.
And talking about the swagger, he's the guy carrying it with one hand, Mike. You never would teach that, but who's going to tell Jim Brown? Not to carry the ball.
Well, yeah, and he doesn't have soft hands. But, and it's funny when you mentioned the HBCUs, of course, I had the preeminent team up in Wisconsin, Green Bay Packers, one of those first two. And Willie Davis, 30 years later, ended up being my boss as he owned a radio station that I had a couple of sports shows on. So that was like a great dynamic. But I had heard so much about him, growing up. And of course, growing up in Wisconsin, all I heard about was the Packers. But during my time of really watching them, they were bad, like in the 70s with Lynn Dickey and all those guys, even though they had a couple good receivers. But the team was bad until they got Reggie White to break the whole cycle of not being able to get any kind of free agent. So that pretty much changed it. And, of course, Brett Favre gets one. And then later on, of course, Aaron Rodgers gets one. But my thing about the 60s also that was a phenomenon was the conversion of a lot of black men because they felt like their last names weren't really theirs. And how apropos on Malcolm X's 98th birthday when we talk about a lot of these players that changed their names to a Muslim name back then. And, of course, also in the early 70s, but, of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then you had Ahmad Rashad a little later, but then you had Ali. Yeah. So it was a lot of that going on in the 60s, too, where I think a lot of black men felt like we have a different identity and we want to really look at this Islamic name as it might be more of a connection to our forefathers in Africa.
Yeah.
It was I'm just looking at some of these videos. I mean, and I think of the Richard Pryor skit when Jim is just dragging guys and the guy says, Jim, would you go down now? As he's dragging guys down the sideline. But man, we go from this man to now. You look at the NFL today, and Ray, Lamar Jackson just signs the biggest contract in the history of the National Football League. The black quarterback.
It's the year of the black quarterback, no doubt.
And that's 1 month after the Super Bowl quarterback has signed the highest contract.
Right.
So the two contracts that are the highest paid contracts in the football were signed within 1 month of each other. Hurts signed his, and they said, "Oh my! Celebrate! Highest paid guy ever in the history of football."
But Ray, how does that make you feel as a guy who played in the league, coached in the league, had to take the NBA to court and actually took the NBA to court
Right.
and won, which is a great accomplishment in itself. To see the escalation of the black athlete in terms of their finances, you see what LeBron has done in the NBA and even in Major League Baseball, where there are very few black athletes, but those that are there are very well compensated.
Well, all of these guys should be sending roses every week to Oscar Robertson's house. Because Oscar Robertson and Jim Brown, but Jim stepped away from the intricacies of football and got into the economics of existence. But he also talked about sports. The difference, the variable there between Jim and Oscar. Jim fought from the outside. Oscar fought from the inside. And Michael, you can research it. It's in my book, but you can research
Yeah, it is.
Oscar Robertson, who put his neck on the line while playing, has never served the NBA as a representative. He's never been an owner. He's never been a general manager. He's never been a coach. Now, how can anyone...
Possibly the greatest point guard in the history of the league.
But let's not go with the play. Let's go with what he did with his life.
Oh,
he
great man.
put himself outside a doctor of the mainstream of the NBA by fighting for the players. We all achieve what we achieve on that man's back. That's how I feel.
And you think that goes across the spectrum of sports?
Absolutely. Well, he had guys like a Jim Brown, but remember, Jim didn't fight from the inside.
Yeah.
Jim said, "I'm through with y'all." And they said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, after I make this movie and I got Raquel Welch waiting over there, so I'm out of here. I'm going to get out and I'm going to be healthy." And he served a great life, in my opinion, as a healthy African-American ex-athlete.
And if you read Maurice White's book, My Life with Earth, Wind, and Fire, the great Maurice White, he talks about Jim Brown being critical to their success as a band when nobody knew who they were. He was there getting them gigs, supporting them, encouraging them. And he worked with other artists in the entertainment business after he left football.
Yeah.
So,
Fred Williamson.
Yeah, so his impact. I said we are going to do 30 minutes. I should have known. There's no way in the world to cover this topic in 30 minutes. But I do want to get out of this.
Can I make a personal comment?
Yeah. I was going to say I want to go there.
The Browns at some point won National Football League championship in the mid 50s.
64, I believe they won.
Okay.
65.
Right.
65.
Okay.
64.
I had a cousin who lived in Muncie, Indiana. He was from Warsaw, Indiana. And every summer I would end up in Indiana at my aunt's home. She lived across the street from a lake on the other side of the street in a park. And my cousin would come to Warsaw, pick me up, and we'd go to Chicago. Now that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Getting to go to Chicago. And they used to play the college all-star football game in Chicago. And just so happened the Browns had won the NFL championship, and I got to go to the game. And Dick Butkus came out of college that same year, and he was playing in the All-Star game. And during the course of the game, there was restlessness every time Brown got the ball, and Dick Butkus, as great a football player as he was exactly that way that day. But late in the game, when the All-Stars were still in the game, Jim Brown went right up the middle and Butkus, bam! Jim came out the other end, kept running for about a 60-yard touchdown. And man, you talking about getting to see Jim Brown in person was the highlight of a little country boy from Lebanon, Tennessee's sports career. Later on, probably in that same trip, I got to meet Joe Louis on the golf course in Indianapolis, where another cousin lived. So my time in the Midwest was well spent. But back to Jim as a man and as an icon, there is no way to truly come to the conclusion of the measure of influence he exerted in professional sports, in society, in entertainment, as you guys were just saying. It's amazing that he touched so many people, but you never hear about anything other than his time with the Browns, his movie career, and the picture, the summit. So it's he lived, as Ray said, an exemplary life. He did things that other people dared not to even mention. And my sympathies to his family as they deal with his passing.
Mike, as younger men here, I mean, we owe so much to these guys for paving the way,
Right.
For us to have our careers in the world of sports as Black journalists. Your thoughts on Jim as we close out?
All right. Well, I was going to say also to Dr. Head, I mean, you could have actually stopped in Gary and seen the Jackson 5 family. So, well, I don't know if they were formed by then. They might have been just getting started.
No, they were only a thought in their dad's
yeah.
mind.
Dad had them in the garage practicing probably.
Yeah, I think Michael might have been born around that time. But yeah. So for me, as I said, I'm a person that respects the past. I get so tired when these guys say, "Oh, they're better athletes now. Everything's better now." I said, "No, it's not." I mean, yeah, it might be more three-pointer shot now. It might be more passing yards now. And you're going to get more rushing yards because they're playing 16, 17 games. Right. So some of those stats are askew because, you're not looking at the real variables right there. This guy absolutely dominated, and that's what you have to look at. You got to have its levels to this. When he played against his peers, he was the preeminent, most dominant player during that era or any era. So that's the thing that I really respect, is that when I look back and say, okay, what Wilt was doing was absolutely phenomenal, but you get these new school people now say, oh, that was nothing. He was playing against 4 people. Like someone like Ray Scott wasn't even around, okay? Or, well, Bill Russell, they were only good because it was only 8 teams. So, not that, well, if it's the less teams, that means more stars on each team, not a watered down league where you have expansion teams where there's going to be easy wins.
Exactly.
At least that. So
everybody can play.
Exactly. And that's what I said when I said, you know what, when you guys take these shots at Bill and all these guys back in the day, think about this. When Michael first came in the league, it was only 23 teams. He didn't start winning till it was about 30 teams because they added, 4 expansion teams, and they added 2 more. Then they added Charlotte, but he might have been gone by then. But it was close to 30 teams by the time he started winning. So that meant that those are players that would have been in the CBA when he first got started. So was he in a great era, or was Bill Wilt them in a better era where you had star players on every team. So
you have to read Ray's book about the different eras and how it's difficult to compare apples and oranges, or at least apple wine to apples. The apples have gotten smooth and mellow and turned to wine, and all these young apples are coming out now. Your point about 3-pointers and stuff, Ray said that in his book, said this guy goes down the court, he's right at the basket, and he flips it back outside for a guy to take a bad shot.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's it. That's true.
And Ray, you got to get the book by Ray Scott, The NBA in Black and White, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA coach. The great Ray Scott. Ray, your final thoughts.
I just, this is such a great conversation.
It really is.
They let us go. We probably could go far into the night. And I have to say this, because the history of the African American in sports is so enriched by these talented, noble men that they saw fit, and they had to see fit to bring us into their sports emporium. They never looked back when they made that. Whoever took those risks, I thank them, because you have been so rewarded for your faith in these men. And I begin with the Earl Lloyds and the Sweetwater Cliftons and the guys that didn't get, they weren't household, the Chuck Coopers. They weren't household names, but they were guys that could walk out in front of a crowd of 10,000 people in a stadium and not have any friends in the stands and perform. And, America has really got to look at the cultivation of the standards that they live by and how we can get more out of who we are and not look for less.
Yeah.
Ricky, let me give a shout out to one other person that we didn't really mention,
Absolutely.
even though he's from up above the border.
Absolutely.
Willie O'Ree in hockey.
Hockey.
Oh,
Yeah, Willie O'Ree. Yeah, he.
Yeah. I was Portland. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And,
You know what, guys?
And the women of color in track and field. I'm a track and field guy.
I mean, Ray said it. We could go another hour. We didn't get into the Tiger Bells and Wilbur Rudolphs and all that.
Willie White.
We'll probably have to come back and do a full show and do a part 2 and continue this. But speaking of GOATs and icons, I want to do this.
And finally, my old lady called Jim Brown up. She said, Jim gonna come over and tell you, fuck Jim Brown. I'll show Jim Brown. I'm the man. I don't give a fuck. Nobody afraid of Jim Brown here. Jim was coming in the driveway. I got all nervous. Boom, jingling. Where's it? Jim Brown. Oh, shit. Let me get this motherfucker ain't gonna scare me. Let me get my pipe. Pipe said, come on, Rich. Me and you will show Jim. Don't worry about it. Shit, Jim, don't scare nobody. That's right, Rich. Jim come in the room. I started smoking. Hey, Jim. How you doing, bro? And Jim had psychology. Jim go, you wanna go roller skating? Maybe you wanna go for a ride? Jim say, what you gonna do? So what do you mean? What you gonna do about that shit? What? I'm doing what I want to do. You know, I ain't afraid of you, you know. You ain't no movie star to me. I ain't scared of you, motherfucker. I'm your friend. What you gonna do? You gonna get well or you gonna end our friendship? What you gonna do? The pipe said, don't listen. He trying to fuck with you, Rich. Jim, I am a man. There ain't no doubt about that. But what you gonna do? And Jim kept saying that to me all through the hall. What you gonna do? Leave me the fuck alone. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm getting the fuck away from you so I don't have to hear what you gonna do. Because I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do. Now leave me the fuck alone. What you gonna do? So Jim almost got me to the hospital, but he had to go somewhere, like to home to eat. And I was in the room with the pipe, and the pipe said, hey, Rich, Jim's gone.
The greatest comic.
I want pardon the language to I hope the language wasn't too offensive to some of our viewers out there.
But it couldn't be much worse.
Yeah.
If you put Richard Pryor on, you know what you're going to get. And Richard really thought Jim did. Credits Jim with helping save his life. He was a great man. And Jared Wiley, RIP to Jim Brown. Thanks, Jared. And I always thank you for supporting the show. And thanks to everybody out there that tuned in for this special edition of the African American Athlete. One more time with Ray's book. Make sure you go pick it up. It is great. You can get it anywhere books are sold. I got mine on Amazon Prime. The NBA in black and white, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA coach.
Ray sent me one with a signature in it. Hey, and that's one of my keepsakes there, my brother.
Yeah, I got to get mine autographed from Ray. And don't forget, come back Sunday. Mike and I will be back. We'll be talking, probably talk some NBA. And we're going to have Dr. Head and Ray back real soon. But until then, peace, everybody. Be blessed. Take care. Enjoy the games this weekend.